They called her Mary-Ellen, though if that was her real name, no one could say for sure. She didn't speak. She never looked people in the eye. She was just there, sitting on the edge of the porch in that splintered rocking chair that never moved. Slightly forward, her body tilted, like a child who'd been scolded and forgotten. And for decades, in that tiny Appalachian town no one cared to visit, hidden in plain sight, she remained. People didn't talk about her. Not really. They lowered their voices when she passed by, hunched under her bonnet, dragging one foot behind the other, like it had forgotten how to be a foot. A witch is what the children called her. The elders said nothing. And the middle-aged, those born in between two truths, only stared and prayed they wouldn't end up like her. But Mary-Ellen wasn't cursed. She wasn't possessed. She was the end product of something older, something colder. A family tree that never branched. A bloodline so closely stitched together that by the time she was born, the damage was already done. The locals say her mother gave birth in a hoff, alone in silence, wrapped in an old Union Army blanket. They say the child came out with her mouth sealed shut and one eye turned sideways. That her first sound wasn't a cry, but a slow, rattling breath that made the chicken scream. A birth certificate. Records don't show. No hospital file, no midwife, no witnesses, no nothing. Just a sudden child appearing in a family that had added a new member in over 20 years. But if you looked hard enough, if you knew where to dig, you'd see that this family had been growing, not wide, but inward, layer upon layer of cousin to cousin, sister to half-brother, nephew to grandmother. A system of love designed not for expansion, but for containment. The last one was Mary-Ellen, the final breath of a bloodline that had folded in on itself so many times it couldn't remember how to be human anymore. She didn't need to be hidden, because no one believed what they were seeing. And yet, if you stood close enough, if you dared to look her in the face, you'd feel it. Not fear, not pity, but a kind of recognition. As if some buried part of you whispered, "This could have been us." The town was called Elkhorn Hollow, tucked so deep into the Virginia mountains that even the mail stopped trying. No paved roads, no streetlights, just rusted signage and trees that grew so thick you could vanish between them. Folks there knew how to keep things quiet. And quiet is exactly what the Haydens wanted. That was Mary-Ellen's last name, Hayden. A name that once held weight back in the 1800s when old Elijah Hayden built the first mill on the creek and claimed half the valley as his own. They were land-rich, yes, but something else too. They didn't marry outside the mountain, not once. Every Hayden wedding was a reunion, and every funeral a mercy. The story goes that Elijah had 3 daughters and a son. The daughters married their cousin. The cousin's son married his aunt, and the son, well, he took a liking to his sister when no one else was around. It wasn't love, it was legacy. A desperate attempt to preserve the purity of a name that should have been left to rot. Generation after generation, the Haydens repeated themselves. The same flat noses, the same sloped shoulders, the same heavy silence. By the time Mary-Ellen was born, the blood had turned on itself, twisting bone, warping speech, softening skulls like fruit, left in the sun too long. They weren't evil, just broken, like copies of copies of copies. And yet, no one intervened. No doctors visited. No social workers knocked. No church groups made the trip. The locals had an understanding. Leave the Haydens alone. They paid in cash. They didn't beg. And their property was marked with fence posts, carved into crude human figures, arms outstretched, eyes gouged out. Superstition maybe, but it worked. So Mary-Ellen grew up in that hollow without ever leaving it. Never saw a city, never learned to write. Her world was dirt paths and creaking boards, goats with names, shadows that moved at night and walked. It spoke in voices that were all too familiar. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just watched. Her gaze always tilted, as if she were staring at something behind you, something in you. And when she reached adulthood, there was no ceremony, no suitor, just silence. And yet she lived. That's the part that haunts people the most. She lived not well, not fully, but long, as if nature itself refused to clean up the mess. They say Mary-Ellen lived to be 52, though no one can prove it. There are no official records, no license, no census listing, not even a tombstone. Just a moss-covered patch of earth behind the house, guarded by a ring of blackened stones and a rusted iron cross bent backward. The kind of grave you don't mark for remembrance, but to keep something in. But before she died, she was seen occasionally quietly wandering the edges of town when dusk rolled in. Her dress stiff with dust, her mouth twitching like it was trying to form words no one had taught her. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. She didn't even blink. She simply stood there, a relic out of time, flesh from another era. A few brave kids would bike out there at night, daring each other to spot her. The Hayden Watch, they called it. They told stories, said her fingers were too long, her knees bent the wrong way, that if she touched you, your dreams would collapse into static. Most of that was legend, but not all. One woman decades later swore on her son S. grave that Mary-Ellen entered her yard one night and stared through the screen door for over an hour. Didn't move, didn't speak, just breath slow and ragged like a dying animal trying to remember how lungs work. The woman said it was the loneliest sound she'd ever heard. And that's the part no one talks about. Mary-Ellen wasn't a monster. She wasn't evil. She was the echo of a mistake no one had the courage to correct. Her mind was like a room with no corners. Her body a map of errors passed down like a family recipe. And yet beneath the strangeness was grief, a deep inherited sadness, the kind that doesn't come from one life, but many stacked atop each other, each generation pressing its weight on the next until something finally buckles. When the old Hayden house finally caved in after a hard winter, they found her room still intact. Bare floorboards, one mattress, no lights, and on the wall above her bed, drawings, hundreds of them, all scratched in charcoal and soot. The same image repeated again and again, a face, not hers, but someone else's. A man with hollow eyes and a cruel smile. Some think it was her father. Others think it was the origin of the curse. But whatever it was, Mary-Ellen saw it every night before she slept. There's one photo of her, only one. It's buried in a forgotten county archive, mislabeled under vagrants from the 1970s. Faded, torn, scanned once, and lost to dust. She's standing in front of a chicken coop, barefoot, staring directly into the lens. And when you see it, really see it, you don't forget. Her face doesn't match itself. One eye droops slightly lower. The nose seems pushed off center, lips thin and dry like bark. But it's not the deformity that grips you. It's the expression hollow, not confused, not afraid, just empty, like no one had ever spoken to her long enough to fill the space behind her eyes. You look at that image, and you can feel it. That ancient unspoken ache, the weight of 100 blood-bound decisions she never got to make. It sits in her shoulders, curled in the way she holds her arms. Every part of her says, I was never meant to be here. But nature doesn't ask questions. It just repeats what it's given. A local historian once tried to trace the Hayden line. He stopped after 5 generations. Said the family tree looked more like a spiderweb. Names repeated, years overlapping, cousins born within months of their uncles. He described it as closed-loop biology, a system where genetics had nowhere to go but back into themselves. Every deviation compounded, every error magnified. By the time it reached Mary-Ellen, it wasn't just physical. It was spiritual. The soul buckles under that much recycling. Language slips, logic, phrase, emotion warps into instinct. And what's left is something ancient and unspeakably sad. Not feral, not mindless, just exhausted. And still people whispered about her. The witch of the hollow, God's punishment, the girl that never was. But what no one dared say out loud was this: she was us. She was what happens when shame becomes tradition, when pride masks itself as preservation, when a family forgets the point of love and replaces it with legacy. People think horror is something you see, a ghost, a monster, a murder. But the real horror, it's quiet, patient. It sits at the edge of the porch for decades, rocking slowly, watching the world move on without it. And if you're not careful, you'll walk right past it and never realize it was warning you the whole time. There was a doctor once, a young man fresh out of medical school who thought he could make a difference in rural communities. He came to a lorn hollow in the fall of 1972, bringing a suitcase full of pills, good intentions, and city teeth. Dr. Carson was his name, and he lasted 6 weeks. He wasn't afraid of poverty or disease. He'd seen worse. But when he met Mary-Ellen, something shifted in him. He wrote about it once in a letter to his mentor. Said she had the saddest eyes I've ever seen in a living being. That her silence was not stubbornness, but the result of something deeper, something irreparable. He tried to examine her politely, gently. She didn't resist, but she didn't help either. Just sat on the porch, watching his hands like they were foreign creatures. He noted her skeletal structure, uneven hips, fused vertebrae, a jaw too narrow to chew solid food properly. But it was her mind that disturbed him. She had no sense of time, no sense of self. When asked her name, she didn't answer. When shown a mirror, she blinked once and looked away. He asked her to draw something, anything. She stared at the paper for 30 minutes, then picked up the pencil and began to scribble furiously. Not shapes, not letters, just loops, spirals, tunnels, like she was trying to dig through the page and escape. Dr. Carson left that winter. No formal diagnosis, no report filed. He later told friends over drinks that he hadn't met a patient. He'd met a relic, a living record of what happens when a family stops evolving and starts collapsing inward. He said she haunted his dreams for years, not with screams, not with blood, but with stillness. If you're still watching, he once said in an interview decades later, you're already braver than most. Most people turn away when truth looks like that. Twisted, silent, inescapable. And yet, Elhern Hollow never changed. The people stayed. The silence stayed. And Mary-Ellen, long after Dr. Carson vanished back into the city, remained, watching, breathing, rotting slowly in a house that should have been condemned decades earlier. Her life was a question no one wanted answered. But her face, her quiet, broken face, became the answer no one could ignore. The real secret wasn't Mary-Ellen. It was what came before her. Buried in the records beneath the wrong dates, misspelled names, and burned pages was something far worse than inbreeding. It was choice. Deliberate, repeated choice. The Haydens didn't just marry within. They eliminated anyone who tried to leave. 3 girls, ages 11, 13, and 16, sisters, disappeared from the family home in 1903. The local sheriff wrote it off as a runaway case, but the midwife's journal from that year told a different story. She'd been called to the Hayden property a few weeks later, not for a birth, for 3 shallow graves. The girls had been found with burlap sacks tied over their heads, throats slit clean. No one was ever charged. The journal was hidden in the wall of the midwife's cabin. She'd left a note on the last page written in shaking hands. The Haydens feed on themselves. The purest bloodline is the one that never mixes, never questions, never escapes. By the time Mary-Ellen was born, there were only a handful of Haydens left. The others were buried, missing, or presumed insane. Those who remained were either too old to breed or too damaged to function. She was the last gasp of a lineage that should have ended long before. Some say she wasn't born from any one person, that she was the result of multiple unions, overlapping, hidden, layered like rot. A grandmother who became a mother again, an uncle who fathered his own niece. It was all rumor, of course, but the rumors were more coherent than the truth. And yet, despite everything, despite the bodies, the whispers, the decay, no one stopped them. Because to stop them would mean admitting what was happening. It would mean facing the quiet genocide of a family by its own hand. And maybe that's what Mary-Ellen was trying to show us in her stillness. That horror isn't always loud. Sometimes it doesn't scream or stab or haunt. Sometimes it just sits for 52 years on a porch with a face that asks a question no one wants to hear. What if this is what survival really looks like when everything else is stripped away? She didn't run. She didn't rage. She simply existed. And maybe that was the worst part. The house is gone now, burned in 1998. They say by accident, though no one filed a report. No fire trucks came. Just a column of black smoke rising through the pines. And then silence, as if something old and patient had finally exhaled. They never found her remains, not officially. Some bones were pulled from the rubble, small, discolored, fused in ways that didn't match any known condition. But the coroner marked the cause of death as undetermined, and the box was buried behind the Baptist church without a name, just a number etched into the brass plate. Locals claim they still see her sometimes, a woman at the edge of the woods, not walking, just standing, watching like a shadow that refuses to fade. One boy swore she followed him home once, matching his steps without making a sound. When he turned to look, she was already gone. But his dog never barked again after that. What Mary-Ellen became in death is less important than what she represented in life. She was the final echo of a bloodline that rejected the world in favor of itself. That chose silence over salvation, isolation over change, and in doing so, created a living monument to what happens when legacy becomes a tomb. The scariest part, her story isn't unique. There are other families, other hollows, other names long forgotten, tucked between mountains or swamps, or back roads with no signage. America is filled with them. Pockets of history deliberately unrecorded because what lies there doesn't fit into textbooks. It's too raw, too grotesque, too. Mary-Ellen isn't a ghost. She's a warning about pride, about blood, about how far a family will go to protect itself from the world, even if it means destroying its own future. You won't find her in history books. You won't hear her name in documentaries. But if you ever pass through a place where the trees feel too still, where the air presses heavy on your chest, where the locals say, "Don't go that way," without explaining why, you might have gotten close enough to feel what she felt her entire life. Unseen, unspoken, unavoidable. And if you listen carefully, you might still hear it. That breath, that slow, rattling breath, like something half-human, still trying to remember how to be alive.